Welcome to the Equity Teacher Leader Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Rachael Mahmood. In this podcast, we'll dive into the stories, the voices, and the expertise of incredible teacher leaders who are making a difference through the equity work they do in their classrooms and their communities. As your 2024 Illinois Teacher of the Year, I decided to start this podcast to elevate some of the amazing educators that we have in Illinois. And I am super excited to have Dillin Randolph on with us today. Dillin is the Cook County Co-Regional Teacher of the Year for the 2024 cohort. I know he's doing amazing equity work in his school, in his classroom, and in his district. And I'm super excited to have you here today. Dillin, tell us a little bit about yourself.
All right. Well, what's up? I am a high school English teacher. I work at Niles West High School in Skokie, Illinois. I technically teach every grade level. I teach freshman English, sophomore English, AP African American Studies, and a course I created called Black and African Stories, which hits all grade levels at a certain point. And I have been a teacher for 8 years now. Longer if you want to include when I was involved in athletics. But yeah.
When you said all grade levels, I was thinking, are you going to throw out a curveball here and say, like, I taught kindergarten and first
Oh,
grade?
no, no.
So
I'm very interested in those grade levels, but I've not taught that low yet. Not that level.
So all grade levels when it comes to the high school classroom. Nice, nice. Well, very excited to have you on today. So you mentioned athletics. I know I read this interesting story about you, about how you came into teaching, and you didn't go the traditional route. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, I'll start off by saying, but like, I did not want to be a teacher. I thought you didn't get paid enough, which in so many cases is true. I was like, why would I do a hard job and not get paid a lot? Which I feel like I'm doing now anyway. But um, I was in college. I wanted to be a social media manager. That was a hot new job back at the time, and I feel like everybody manages their own social media now anyway. But and I was like, man, like I was an office assistant in the pharmacy department of my college. I went to UIC. I was like, man, I need more money than what this is paying me. And I know back when in high school, I was a custodian. I was a custodian at at the elementary schools of the district. And I was like, well, if I can be like a custodian again, like, I mean, I know they pay me pretty well. I get some money there. So I went online and checked my old high school, Evanston Township High School. I checked online to see if they had custodian jobs. They did. They also had a wrestling coach position opening. I was like, I did wrestling in high school. Let's look this up. Saw the qualifications. They were like, you gotta have to have done all these great things, wrestled in college and did this. I'm like, yo, I was just pretty good in high school. I don't know what to tell you. So I didn't fill out the application. I looked at it, half filled it out and left it alone. Long story short, the head coach who's my head coach in high school called me. He was like, I saw you did the application. Do you want the job? And I was like, yeah, let's do it. Found out it paid me just as much as I was getting paid as an office assistant. I just had to work less and focus on school more. So I was like, okay, I'll do that. And while being a coach, I fell in love with helping kids. Kids looking for me for mentorship, asking me questions, literally teaching them. I was teaching them, wrestling moves, and figuring out what's the best way to teach. You know, Developing teaching strategies before I even knew they had names. Like think alouds and metacognition. Like those are the things I was really big on just as a coach. And realizing, I can take that and do it with literature. So athletics was my way in. I was a wrestling coach. I was a football coach. And during that time, while I was in college, I was a wrestling coach and football coach. And at that point, I was like, yo, I gotta be a teacher. Like I gotta do this all day, every day.
You caught
Ran
the
back to
teaching
college.
bug.
That's what I'm saying. Like I went back to my counselor, my college counselor. I was like, "Yo, switch me to education." She was like, "Well, that'll like add a year and a half to your journey and this much." I was like, "I don't care.
That's
I don't care."
amazing. That's the kind of passion we're looking for, right? Somebody who comes in and they're like, I don't care if the paycheck's going to be less than what I was thinking. I don't care what it takes. I need to be with kids, doing right by kids. I definitely understand that struggle. My parents wanted me to be a doctor. My dad so much told me that if I became a doctor, he would buy me a brand new sports car. And I was like, Daddy,
You
I
turn that down.
really really want to be a teacher. Yeah, I turned that down. And he said, Rachel, if you become a teacher, I'll buy you a bicycle. And I mean, sorry to say, he has neither bought me a bicycle. Let it go on the record today that he's neither bought me a bicycle nor a sports car. I was awful at athletics in high school, so definitely did not come in through the coaching realm, but love children, right? And I think that's what centers us in this space, like our love for children, that unconditional love we have and the support we give them every day. It really defines what makes a great teacher. So I was also reading on you, which I thought this was interesting, that when you started teaching at your very first teaching job, you were one of the first or only male Black teachers. Is that correct?
Yeah, so at my first job, when I first walked into the school, one of the Black teachers came in. It was like they greeted herself, introduced me, ingratiated me into everything, and I thought it was fine, thought it was normal because growing up, I had Black teachers. There were Black male teachers, so I
Wait,
thought like
wait,
Black
where
teachers.
did you grow up at?
I grew up in Evanston, Illinois, and
Okay,
we went
okay,
through
Evanston,
District
that's right.
65 in Evanston. So Black teachers were common. My first teacher ever, my kindergarten teacher, was a Black woman. So I thought like Black teachers are normal, whatever. But then once I started, looking around, I was like, hold up, it's just me, you know? And so yeah, I found out that in the history of the school, I was not only the second Black teacher, they had Black employees, but the second Black teacher ever hired, but the first Black male.
Yeah, I definitely can relate to you on that. When I started working in Naperville, District 204, the school that I was hired at 20 years ago, I was the first certified teacher of color hired in that building. And you
Ever?
feel the weight ever, ever. And that includes all different skin tones, colors, backgrounds, ethnicities. And you can definitely feel the weight of being the first or the only when you're in a building. Right now, I just left a building where I was the only non-Christian certified educator for the last 9 years. And so it can take a toll on somebody. Do you have any great advice? How did you cope with that or navigate that space?
Well, one thing too, I feel like there's a difference. Like sometimes there's being the first to do something and being the only somewhere. And I'll be honest, I being the first was like it was pressure, but I liked it. It's like in basketball, you take the 5 seconds of your last shot. So it's that pressure. Like, oh, like if it goes in, I'm the hero. If it doesn't, like that's fine, whatever. So I like being the first, but sometimes being the only can be lonely, you
Yeah.
know. So sometimes you look around, you're like, of course you can find something in common with everybody. But sometimes, when they have that shared history, that shared culture, that shared trauma, that shared, is there somebody in the room when something happens, you can look at them, make that face, and you both know what you're talking about, shared language, even just that, there's sometimes I feel like being the only means it can be lonely because you miss that.
That's a good point. That's a good point. It's so important that we find our people, right? And so I know that something that really helped me was looking outside of my school to find some affinity spaces with other people from my cultures, other educators that were doing the work. So sometimes I could go back and debrief with them as well. But also finding my people in the school. Like you said, there's something you can connect with everybody on, right? Even if you don't have that shared identity, there are definitely people that can be there to support you. Finding your people are so important. So you had mentioned this Black literature course right in the beginning when you were introducing yourself. You kind of dropped it really quick. I'd love to circle back to that. This podcast is all about sharing a real instructional strategy, something that listeners can walk away with and do in their classroom or in their practice. And, I was really interested in the Black literature course that you got started at your school. Tell us a little bit about that course.
So yeah, so luckily, I'm privileged enough in my district, especially with the high school district, that we have a committee in which you could present ideas for a course proposal. I worked with our director of equity to propose a course centered around the stories of people of the African diaspora. Especially, I did that on the back of recently we do have a large Asian population. In our district, when we see Asia, a lot of times we think of like East Asian, but we're thinking of like the entire continent of also including people of of South Asia as well. So they have an Asian American exactly.
Right
So
here,
we
South Asian, right here. Sorry, just gotta throw that out there.
no, and that's good because they wanted to create an inclusive Asian American literature course. Because when people think of it, they would think of like, oh, we're thinking of just the stories of people from China, Japan, or Korea, or things like that. But like it's everywhere in Asia in all those stories, and they created a Asian American literature and an Asian American studies course for the district. And I was thinking, we have all of these equity driven courses. We have those courses. We have women in gender studies. We have literally a course called social justice and equity. Well, what we're missing is that even though a lot of teachers try to incorporate the stories of people of the African diaspora or try to incorporate Black-centered ideas in the curriculum, sometimes it's just you just may not have room for it. You may not have room for it, even if you try to make room. So what about creating a course that centers those stories? So I wanted to propose that course to the district, and went through a few name changes, but we've now settled on Black and African stories because we want stories. So we can instead of literature, we wanted stories because stories we wanted to make sure we're highlighting. When we think of literature, we think a lot of times like books or primary sources, nonfiction, and stories we want to incorporate is just the stories of people. The literature we talk about. It can be a movie, it can be a film, it can be music, it can be an interview with somebody, it could be a TV show. All those things count as the literature we can study of people of the African diaspora. And we wanted to make sure we wrote Black and Africans. We felt like that's very encompassing of people of the African diaspora. We have a lot of students who identify as Black, but maybe not African American.
Thinking about when you use the word stories versus literature, there's an element of realness there. The idea that this is the voices of a population that you're amplifying. When we say stories, it's like people's voices. When we say literature, we think of something like maybe much more refined every time, edited, and could involve, other varying perspectives on how that came to be. And so I love the idea of centering people's stories in that space. And I love the fact that you're talking about the difference between Black African Americans and Africans who are Black, because I think that that's often two groups, two completely different identities that get conflated and confused often, and people assume that they have the same experience. Well, I'm South Asian and I have caramel brown skin, and if you put my skin next to a Mexican, we have the same skin tone too, but I don't think anybody would agree that an Indian person and a Mexican person have the same culture. And so I think that we need to frame out that in our courses for our students in our schools, that Black African Americans and Black people who come from different countries in Africa have very different cultures. Even two countries very close to each other, like Ghana and Nigeria, have different languages, have different cultures, have different religions that are centered, different customs, different traditions, and and those things need to be teased apart.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's so awesome. So can I ask you a question? How did you go about like choosing which stories were going to be centered in the space? You told us a little bit about how you chose a mix of African American and African stories, but how else did you decide like what would be pivotal in being included?
Well, as a teacher of the course, at a certain point, I do want to tell stories of the stories that I'm familiar with, the stories I'm passionate about. I am Black, but also identify as African American. So there's some African American stories that I would love to share with my students, to either provide, a window or a mirror into, that culture. But at the same time, I want to be inclusive of the students who we have. So based off of just, if you can think about like data-driven decisions or just, a lot of times we're talking about, like street data now.
Yeah, absolutely. Who doesn't
That
love
could
some
be,
good street data?
saying that could be a whole thing. I'm doing my whole dissertation based off that, but like just
Yeah.
make it shorter. I could just talk to my students and gather data that way. And I've a lot of students who really want to hear more about the stories and the literature from people of the Caribbean, the people from not only just of the continent of Africa, but like you said, certain countries and certain cultures. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to extract and find those stories. I'm talking to the teachers. I'm talking to students to be like, do you know anything you'd like to learn more about? Is there just a country or region you want to know more about? Then it's on me to to try to find those stories I think would be interesting and compel my students to want to learn more.
That's great. I love that piece of like student advocacy in deciding those curricular decisions and like maybe even leaving some space year to year in that syllabus for that student selection, right? So you can constantly be responsive to the students that are in your classroom as well as their identities and who chooses to take this course. Their identities come in and differ from year to year, having some space for them to be able to decide what that curriculum looks like. This is so fascinating. Absolutely love it. Do you want to give a shout out to any of the books that you were really passionate about or stories that are definitely included that maybe some other teachers could pick up and try to incorporate or think about?
Well, honestly, like when it comes to the actual literature and books, that's a small part of it. As much as we're just looking at certain parts of the culture and looking at how we can incorporate that into the class. So one of the books I'm thinking about using for next year, I haven't used it yet. You know the book James by Percival Everett. It's basically how to say retelling a different perspective of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. So it's a different version of that, and I would love to teach that book in the course. Um, and other thing too, we think about is we look at the oral tradition in African tradition and how a lot of times there are stories that are handed down or customs that are handed down. They're not written down, but they're stories that we share, um, or just ways that we speak and ways that we act. And one of the big things I know my students loved, we talk about the art of the boast and the art of the roast. So yeah, within Black and African culture, there's the art of the boast. It's talking about how great you are, how great someone is. That goes all the way back. From ancient African folklore to Kanye West rapping about how great he is. And we look at those comparisons and how they still function in the same culture. Or we look at the art of the roast. Think about where the African origins of playing the dozens and your mama jokes.
Just about to
And
say that. Play the dozen.
exactly.
Yeah.
Like if we had any '90s people out here, think about like in Living Color when they used to have I forgot the skit where they did like the Yo Mama jokes, like it's things like that. Like it's comedy, but it's also rooted in African traditions. So I just showed them things like that. Like we literally watched In Living Color and be like, let's analyze where these type of jokes come from, and are they doing it to make fun of you? Are they doing it for fun? Is it meant to hurt? Is it meant to laugh? Are we laughing through pain? What's the purpose? So we think about things
Wow.
like.
That's so powerful. I absolutely, it sounds like it's an incredible course. It sounds like very dynamic, very deep analysis of Black culture and being that huge diaspora, right, from African and you even mentioned Caribbean Black culture, African American Black culture. I'm sure it's had a great impact on your students. Do you have any great student stories of how it's impacted your students to be a part of this class?
Yeah, I got a student right now who literally skips her lunch. Like she just goes to class. She's not enrolled in the class, and she goes there just to hang out and talk and answer questions. And I can't be mad at it. Like like you're here, you're paying attention, you're eating your sandwich in the corner. Like, oh, I know the answer to that. So I feel like, and the reason why I talk about that student is because she came to me and talked about because I talked about AP African American studies, and she was like, "That's cool, but like, I'm not African American. I'm from Nigeria, so like, I want to learn about like where I'm from." And I was like, "Oh, don't worry, I got you. I got another class that does that." So I feel like that's really something that's when you think about like equity, it's also not only just being culturally responsive and responding to the cultures, but also being culturally proactive and knowing what you already have and trying to provide for the students so they don't have to ask or don't have to respond to what they are. You already know your students and you know how to provide and do things to make them feel seen in a sense of belonging. So that kind of it just helped validate that the work that we do is helping.
That's amazing. I love that. That's like a high school student, like auditing a course. They're like just there, like, participating for the joy of it. We need to get that girl a credit, right? She's getting
I
some
swear,
credit
but
for her lunch
she,
period there.
every day she shows up on time. She gets a bathroom pass, goes gets her food, and comes back. Like,
I love that. I love that. And clearly, the passion is there, the student interest is there, the student impact is there. I mean, what a great idea starting this course for your students. That is definitely an example of how you can be a great equity teacher leader. I know that not everybody's a high school teacher, not everybody has the opportunity to be able to propose a class specifically on one culture's literature or voices or stories. But I think it's so important that you hit that core thing there. Me as an elementary school teacher, looking at our students, seeing their identities, seeing how we can bring their stories in. And you hit the nail on the head when you said it doesn't have to be this big, long novel, right? It can be these short excerpts that just whisper to students, we see you. We see you. You are here. You are part of the history. You are part of the culture. You are part of our school. Your story matters. Your culture matters. And all those small anecdotes, whether they be small stories or, as you said, like, TV clips or anything, they're all a moment to learn about each other and a moment for students to see those mirrors of themselves, helping them to feel successful and feel belonging in our classroom. All right, I just want to end on one last uh, fun question here. If you could create a student success playlist of songs or quotes or stories that inspire you as a teacher, what would be on it? Give us something that you draw your inspiration from.
I got something for you. So when I was a camp counselor, in the summers before I was a teacher, still coaching and things like that. And they showed us this TED talk from Rita Pearson, and I forgot the name of it, but I remember the one sentence that's really stood out to me. She was like, "Students don't learn from teachers they don't like," and the crowd went in a roar. And a lot of people, when they heard that, they were like, "Well, you don't always have to be liked. Like sometimes it's okay to not be liked." And I'm like, I understand that, but I feel like I want my students to like me. It's not that just I want to please them. It's not I want to be a people pleaser. It's just that like I want them to I want there to be enough mutual respect to where our relationship is more than just I give you information and you show me that you know that information through an assessment. So I really try to do my best to make sure, say like I try to make sure students like me. I mean more that I try to make sure there's this extreme level of mutual respect, a level of to where we can talk to each other freely, where I'm approachable, to where if I approach them with with a connection, if I can approach them with a correction, if they can hear my tone in my voice, whether I'm kidding or not kidding, like basically we know each other so much that like this is a mutually beneficial relationship for both of us. So I very highly recommend people looking at that TED talk because it is cliche to be like it was a life changing TED talk, but it really changed how I approached teaching before I actually became an actual teacher. So um, yeah, simply put,
I love
students don't
that.
learn
No,
from
and it's
teachers.
absolutely true. I mean, think about those teachers that you remember. Think about the classrooms that you loved being a part of. I mean, you loved your teacher, and that's really it's the connection. And it doesn't mean that they didn't have to tell you hard stuff or give you difficult feedback. It didn't mean that they didn't have high expectations for you or that you were video gaming in the corner, though we didn't have video games when we were younger in school the way kids can do that on the Chromebooks today. But there is that level of you liked your teacher, and part of it is because they made you feel like you can be successful. And so, what a great quote to end that with. It's just been such a pleasure talking to you today, Dillin. You are clearly an equity leader in your classroom, in your school, in your practice. Just incredibly proud of the great work that you're doing at Niles and the great work that you've done in your career. And definitely, if you want to reach out to Dillin, how can people get a hold of you if they want to hear more about your course or about things that you've done?
Yeah, so if you want to email me, that is fine. I am at DILRAN at d219.org. That is my teacher email. Otherwise, you can catch me on social media. I'm at Mr. Dillin Randolph on Instagram. And I used to have Twitter, but I moved away from that. So it's only social media I'm on right now.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, definitely we'll also drop that into the show notes for today as well, so people have your information. And we're just going to conclude on this. Remember, you don't need a fancy title or a fancy position to be an equity teacher leader. You have the wisdom and agency to create meaningful change in our schools. Hopefully today's podcast gave you some inspiration and ideas to keep on leading. Thank you for all you do for our students and our schools.